Welcome, Kim O'Grady, back from Chestnut Park up in Muskoka. You have created a following with my listeners, and so it only is appropriate that we bring you back for the talk of spring season, but also what happened in 2024 in cottage country. So, hello, and freshly back from Costa Rica, as we were just talking about it before we started filming.
Yes, thank you so much, Rachel, for having me on. And I know I saw that post. You were celebrating. How many podcasts have you done now? It's
We actually stopped tracking it because anyway, that's a whole other story. Because we did one yesterday in person, and I asked my videographer. I think we're over 70 now.
that's amazing. Good for you. That's commitment. That's
Thank
commitment,
you.
and I enjoy watching them. And yes, thank you for having me.
Absolutely. No. So I obviously like and whenever I have a client who's looking for a cottage or anything of the sort, and we partnered on a property last year, and there's really no one else I would call to refer. You just you know your business, you know your market, and you just have a wonderful brand. So there's no
Thank
one else I
you.
would go to about the cottage market. Now, knowing that Muskoka is going to be different than Halliburton, than different than the Kawartha Lakes or even Lake Simcoe, I think at the end of the day I'd love to delve into Muskoka because really that's just the aspirational place that everybody would love to buy. But then also getting your POV on what you think, the cottage industry in general and that second home, type of purchase is going to look like in 2025.
Hmm.
So that was a lot. So let's start with the first question, which was, what would you say 2024 was like? Like, what is there a word that you would use to describe it? Like, is there like what was just your first instinct when someone says, "How was 2024?"
Uh, First word that pops to mind is interesting. I feel like I feel that 2023 and 24, I feel I still call them like hangover years from what we experienced obviously during 2021, and then with the rise in interest rates that we saw in 22, where we literally in May of 22 just kind of could hear the brakes as soon as people's pre-approvals started running out. It was all of a sudden it was just like quiet. And so 23 was still a lot of wait and see. With both people considering selling, people considering purchasing, there was this kind of holding pattern, especially in the cottage market where we're dealing with a discretionary purchase. It's a want, it's not a need. And so a lot of people were sitting on the fence. In 24, there was a bit of a little bit more confidence as we started to see the overnight rate start to drop, and between the fixed and the variable, people starting to get a little bit more confidence in re-entering the market, inflation coming down. So but it still was not, I think I wasn't the only one that was feeling a little bit more optimistic. We started 24 going more in 24, and in fact it
It
was more
wasn't.
of maybe 23 that we saw. Like, it was interesting.
And I always find like the cottage market is so different, like than the residential city market, Toronto market, whatever. So, I always find it very interesting when agents from the city try to do the cottage market. First of all, how can you be in two places at once? I
I
always think to
know.
myself. And second of all, it's such a nuanced sell and purchase. So putting that aside, I also think there's so many similarities because the way I always looked at it, and I saw very similar in 20, like when we were talking in the cottage market, was in 2023, it didn't matter what you priced your house at, no one was buying it.
Yep.
No one, like everyone was just in this stunned position of there's so much uncertainty. Are the rates going to go up to 10%? Are we going to have World War III? Are like what inflation, inflation, inflation? Like, are we going to lose our jobs? That kind of thing. So no one was doing anything. It didn't matter. Like, unless it was like the most perfect, like I think you were actually one, you're like the only thing selling is perfect, right?
Yeah, yeah, the cream puffs.
So then 2024 comes along and everyone's like, you know what? We're going to recovery year. It's going to be better, all this stuff. And everyone was like, nope. But things started to sell. If you priced it properly, things were selling. And so it sounds like in the cottage market it was similar, it just volume was very low.
Yes, absolutely. And especially in sort of that, and it was interesting to see sort of the different price points, like the under 2 million, even under 2.5 was slow. And then we saw the higher price points, and that demographic or that group isn't necessarily as sensitive to interest rates as somebody obviously looking for financing and so forth. So it's a different purchaser, sort of in that higher price point. So if you're looking at financing, you are going to be sensitive to what the rates are doing. And but even that aside, as we've seen, it's affordability is still at the forefront, whether it's a full-time home or a cottage. And that's where, again, it comes back to the pricing and still trying to kind of find I don't want to say the bottom, because there's never a bottom, but sort of what is that sweet spot of really what we deem as market value. And part of the challenge is we didn't have a lot of sales happening, so there's no precedent happening to be able to really confidently say to our clients, well,
Oh yeah.
here are the past 20 cottages that have sold.
On that
We're
lake.
clearly
And yeah.
overpriced. We just
Yeah.
didn't have that. So it goes back to, it was a very interesting market, and they're really, and with the cottage market or rural market, there's definitely no cookie cutter. You're comparing apples to oranges to bananas to kiwis sometimes. So it's a different approach, and so with the market in 24, pricing definitely was at the forefront, and a lot of people purchasing going, you know what, let's just wait and see what happens. And if they drop their price or they're going in and offering, because on average we saw about 95% of sale to list price. So negotiations were happening again.
Oh yeah.
So it was good to see that, and it wasn't unheard to see a sort of a property sell for 100K less than they were asking, or sometimes more than that, depending on, again, the price points you're in.
Well, and I would also think that the threat and risk of the capital gains tax coming in, that has now, and we'll get into that because now that's postponed, shelved, we have an election, like all that stuff. I think that's a whole conversation. I'm sure also allowed people to look down at their spreadsheet and go, does this make sense to sell at a certain price because I'm going to save by selling before? Like, did you see that kind of help your market at all?
There's like everything, there's different sides. I think some may say that yes, especially at the early onset, that could have got sellers. I know I had conversations with people contemplating selling, going, should I get ahead of this? But I mean, again, at the end of the day with real estate, it's always a gamble trying to time the market.
I
And
know.
I feel like 25 is going to be the year of the T's, not talking politics here, but we've got Trump, Trudeau, and taxes, right? Like it's those
You forgot the
variables.
tariffs.
And the tariffs, of course. Yes, I knew there was a fourth T. So we've got, the four T's happening, and but that's the real estate game. There's always something. There's
Well,
always
and
something.
I know that you are of similar thought, like trying to time the market. Like my standard answer is like the house always wins. You go to Vegas, like you're never beating the house.
Yeah,
So like
so true.
go to Vegas, put your money down. If that's your budget, enjoy, right? So it's the same with the house. Like, is this the time that you want to sell? Then you should sell, right? If you
Absolutely.
can wait, wait. But if you can't, like waiting, and I think I just did a video on this yesterday. Like, we have this kind of, not to get ahead of myself into this year, but like we've got this kind of game of chicken, right? Like everybody who wants to sell is waiting to see what happens in the market because no one liked the prices, or did no one loved the prices last year, right? And again, we had such low inventory that we haven't established pricing yet. But if no one sells, we're never going to establish the pricing. And so, like I've got buyers, like every single time something comes up, they're like, do you think that, because we're back to multiples in Toronto and certain price points, and they're like, do you think this will go in my price point? Like, can we go out tomorrow? And it's getting back to that, right? They're not going to overpay, but so going to back to the cottage, and I don't want to put you on the spot, so if you don't offhand know, but I'm just curious, like sales volume or sales average sale of a waterfront, like 2023 versus 2024. Did you see any increase on either volume or price point?
Slightly different. So I break it into South Muskoka and North Muskoka. So you've got sort of the South Muskoka, Muskoka Lakes area, and then North Muskoka, Lake Bays, Huntsville. And so we actually saw, I mean, there wasn't a big difference year over year with both markets. And there was a slight, actually in both markets, there was a slight downward adjustment in the pricing. Now, again, that's month over month, it changes, but it was actually interesting to see the sales actually going down, but then it's the average price point didn't have a huge change. So it's like there was the volume levels were pretty comparable to 23, but at the same time, yeah, so it wasn't a huge difference year over year.
Okay, interesting. And your non-waterfront
Yeah.
properties. I mean, people are like, people live in Muskoka otherwise, like, yes, they do. And there are some lovely little towns there. That was a big headline, obviously, in COVID, people leaving the city centers, and a lot of them, like I know someone that from university who high school that moved out to Grand Bend. Actually, she had a Toronto Life article written about her, and she
Oh,
moved back.
wow.
Yeah,
Wow.
so there was that, like, oh my God, what have I done? So did have you seen that at all, or did you not necessarily experience a huge influx over COVID of like non-waterfront, kind of principal residences?
Yeah, we definitely, and that is actually, we did see an increase in average sale price in the off-water residential market. So while we saw waterfront, which coincides with the whole discretionary purchase, right? People were making less wants choices versus a need. And I mean, the cities are changing. Safety is coming up. I mean, if you want to keep your car, move to Huntsville, right? Like it's just, and I don't mean to make light of it, but it's really like
No.
the cities, like I've had people move up. They're like, we would like to move somewhere where we can have our car in our driveway and not feel like it's going to get stolen, because that's a whole other thing. And so we definitely saw people, but people moving here that are in their 30s, their mid to 30s, because they can work remotely. So that's still affording people that sort of luxury of being able to live anywhere and wanting to raise their families. So what used to be considered either a recreational market or retirement,
Mm-hmm.
we are now seeing more and more young families. I mean, Bracebridge is doing an incredible job building out their sports complex, and which is really going to attract a lot of young families
Families for
in.
sure. Absolutely.
Exactly. And
Yeah,
here
yeah.
in Huntsville, we have an amazing, thriving, like arts. We've got great sports as well, but there's a really big art community that attracts people. So it's we're no longer sort of a roll up the carpet in after Thanksgiving and then roll it back out May 2 4. It is really, now I go to the grocery store and I actually see people I don't know. Like, whereas before it was like you kind of know everybody, but we're definitely growing. Both Huntsville, Bracebridge, Gravenhurst is sort of, they're kind of that, third
Go-to
child.
places.
Yeah. It's but definitely Huntsville and Bracebridge leading the way in growth. Definitely in the off-water market, people just looking for a change in lifestyle.
Yeah, I mean, we had a conversation about a client of mine also who was looking to leave, the city center, just wanted like a bigger backyard and like a simpler life. And I was like, I hear you. I mean, talk about I would be lucky if I was only worried about having my car stolen. I mean, I have friends who've been had armed gunmen come through their front door. Oh, m- that's what's happening, unfortunately, in Toronto in certain parts. And my son now works for a company that is so inundated by calls from doing the film on the windows. So when they come to smash it, it doesn't break. Like that's what you're spending thousands of dollars on now. And they've come up with um, the newest thing I've heard now in the security is when they get through the front door, this like fog sprays, so you have extra time. Like it's insane. Now, most of this is happening in like the lower village, Forest Hill, where you've got, your 10 million, $15 million homes. Fine, but I would say that it's just, people are looking at Toronto, and listen, it's growing pains. It's still a great city to live. People love it. I've still got tons of first-time home buyers who want to build their lives here and raise children, but it's changing. And affordability is, so knowing that you can go to, first of all, Huntsville is delicious. Like I went there with my kids, went to camp in Muskoka, and I enjoyed it. It's a lot better than Halliburton, where my cottage is. They're still a little, they're about like,
Sleepy. It's a little
it's
sleepy.
sleepy.
Yeah.
It's like the one, with that one light town, right? But it's lovely. It's
Yeah. There's a
lovely.
charm to that. Yeah.
There is a charm to that, but yeah, I mean, I'd love to be able to go out for dinner. But
And that's the difference between, and that's what people are like when they ask me Halliburton versus Muskoka, or even Halliburton versus North Muskoka, South Muskoka. It's like, well, what are you looking for, right? Like if you're looking for quiet, remote, Halliburton is wonderful, right? And then if you're looking, you want to be 20 minutes to a restaurant, more than one, then maybe you are looking at Huntsville, Bracebridge. So yeah, it comes down to what the use is, the intended
for
use.
sure. I mean, and price point for sure.
Yes,
Otherwise,
price matters.
I would be in a little shack in Muskoka. But I remember a great story Chris Captious of Chestnut Park told about when they opened up the when they opened up the Halliburton office, and he went to visit it, and he was like, "What? Where am I going? Like, there's nobody here." He's like, "Am I going the right way? Is there like are we sure I have an office up here?" Right? Compared to, because he knows Muskoka very well. And he was like, "I don't think I'm in cottage country anymore."
Yeah, it's a vibe. It's got its own vibe for sure.
For sure. So, what about people who are thinking about buying a cottage this year? I mean, I always, I don't, people always come after the agents, right? The trolls who are like, "Oh, you just want people to buy things. You want them to get into debt." It's not that. I just love the opportunity. Like, I love the idea that, there is that window of time. Like, I think this is a great time to buy a condo in Toronto, right? Like, they're fire sailing them. Like, get into them now if you can afford it. So if you can afford a cottage, I would still say that this is an excellent time to buy one.
Absolutely, because there is negotiation, and most sellers are listing their property with an expectation to negotiate, right? Like a few times I've been caught off guard, which I've never been since, and it's like the list price is you're asking, it's not you're getting, and so buyers right now, people in the market, I mean, there could be deals to be had, and it is coming into the season. We're not seeing a lot of waterfront hit yet, which is typical. Usually we start to see that start in March, towards as we get closer to the Cottage Life show. That's always kind of been a catalyst. Oh, you've got to get on for the Cottage Life show. But but even April, May, I mean, the reality is properties, especially cottages, show better when you can actually see what's under the snow. There's always that little bit of like, well, what am I buying?
Oh my
Being
God, I would
the
never buy a
access
cottage
that
in a
and
snow.
and
Yeah.
and that's why I share again. If my client who is selling is considering, should we get on the market now? Personally, in my opinion, again, this is very general, is it's too early. It's premature. I feel like there are people out there wanting to purchase who are going to want to wait and see unless again it's a cream puff and they're like, oh my gosh, I've been wanting on that lake with that exposure.
Exactly.
Totally
Yes.
different. But if
Yes.
if you're cottage isn't really necessarily, maybe it's a cream puff to you, but maybe not to the majority. Maybe it could be a little premature to get into the market now versus waiting until March or even April.
No, for sure. I mean, unless you know the lake really, really well, and you know that corner of the lake, and you know the exposure, and you know the drop down, and you know all of that, like it's a very dangerous crapshoot to go and buy a cottage in the snow and not be. I tell this story about my husband when we bought our cottage. He's like, I'm getting in the water. I'm like, what? He goes, I'm not buying a cottage unless I swim. He didn't have a bathing suit. I'm like, is there something wrong with you? He's like, I have to know the water quality. I'm like, okay. I'm like, I don't know him. So average price for like a small lake in Muskoka. I know you're like north south, but like in general, like a small
Like
lake.
Four Season Cottage.
Yep. Four season
Um,
cottage.
you would be just north of still north of 1 million. If you're getting under 1 million, you would be looking at something either 3 season, needs some work, possibly a smaller lake. But yeah, so you'd still be north of 1 million, looking for something 4 season that,
Yeah, yeah. And the starter cottage, like I remember the first cottage we bought was not four season. So like if you're like a first time cottager and you want to just get something that small lake, big lake, whatever it is, but you know, but good bones, you know, that type of thing, like could you get something still for under $1 million? It's so fascinating to me.
you can. There's usually some baggage that comes with those property. You might have an easement going through your property.
Understood. Okay.
There's usually a reason
Okay,
why.
so we're looking at $1 million. We need $1 million as a price point. And then, you know, larger lakes like, you know, the rich and famous on Rosso and Lake Muskoka, what would you say is like an average? We know the boathouses in the Millionaire Row, but like, yeah. Is there like an entry point into those lakes?
Well, with the big three, to get something sort of substantial, you'd be starting at least two, going up probably even 2.5. Now, we did see those prices. So, what might have been, and this is we're seeing a big correction happening on Lake of Bays in particular. And I'm Huntsville Lake of Bays, so that's my warm and fuzzy. So, I know we've seen massive corrections there of somewhere up to $1 million. So, if you had there was a place in particular I'm thinking about that was on Penn Lake. They were listed over 3 million, or sorry, close to 4 million, and it just sold. I believe it was in December of 24 for 2.7 million.
Wow.
So there was a lot of massive price drops from 500 to even 1 million. So it's like if you thought maybe you were 3.5, maybe you're really 2.5, and if you were 2.5, maybe you're 1,995. So there that expectation of what your neighbor sold for in 21 is still a little there, but it's just not. So we've
It's
seen some
lingering.
massive corrections. Yeah, really big corrections. And that's why I say to my clients that I'm working with on the buy side, I'm like, and this it's funny, the word low ball. It's like who calls it it was a seller who probably called it a low ball, right? Because it's an offer, and it's only the perception of how low it is in the eye of the beholder. So is it really a low ball offer, or is it just an offer, but it's not what you feel it should be?
I was just gonna say, you know, I like I say to clients all the time, like the market doesn't care about our feelings. So like I wish that your place was worth that much. I really do. I wish, but like it's doesn't care what I think sometimes, right? Like or want. So, you know, at the end of the day, you can and clients will be like, "Oh, well they were listed for this." I'm like, "But you can list your house for anything you want." Right? So at the end of the day, the market's telling you, here are the offers you've had. They're all in the same range. It's up to you not to sell, right? But if that's what you're getting, do you expect an increase? Do you see people coming back to the cottage market? Do you think you're going to see an increased volume of people coming back this year with the lower interest rates?
I still believe that and going from my conversations and with my fellow colleagues here, there are still people that have the dream of a cottage. It's a lifestyle, as you well know, and if they grew up with that experience, they want to share that with their kids. I do find there's a sweet spot between, you either have to have super young kids or older kids. The teenagers, especially if they're involved in sports and things, I actually have worked with clients who are selling their cottage because they're in Oakville and Burlington or Toronto more than they are up here running their
With
kids around.
hockey and yeah, for
Exactly.
sure.
So, but yeah, I feel that the dream is still there, and even and as a retirement plan, there. If I buy the cottage, I'm not. I will eventually live there. So that is another approach that we're seeing. It's sort of the long term game versus maybe being able to enjoy it full time. So I'd like to be optimistic, and that I do feel that. And the cottage market has always been a matter of, can you afford it or not. Not everyone can afford to have a cottage, but those who can, I do feel it's going to be back on their radar, especially in light of world events. I think we've you know are learning that lifestyle and happiness and what brings us joy matters. And if real estate is a part of that equation and all the feels that come with it, then amazing.
It's so true. I mean, it's February 6th. We've had one, well, the election was, but like we've had a swearing in, we've had tariff wars, we've had like potentially a Canadian election coming. They've now, distanced themselves from the capital gains tax. I mean, it is, I was saying to someone just last week, I'm like, I don't think I can look at the news anymore. It's like one day's up and one day's down. Like this is great news, this is bad news. I'm like, and
It's
and
a
I
rabbit
think
hole.
it is a rabbit hole for sure. Um, I think the only thing else in that realm would be because the capital gains tax is being put and shelved, because I thought that was really going to hurt a lot of things, but including the cottage market. Do you feel like that might just kind of take the sting off some people who might have been, maybe not the ones that could afford, but were like, I'd love to stretch myself. I'd love to have a cottage. I'd like to figure out how to do that. And then it became like, why would I want to do that if I'm going to have to pay such capital gains? Or maybe it doesn't affect as much. Like I think about my capital gains on my cottage. I'm like, you hold on to it forever, right?
Yeah, yeah.
It's
I,
not a
I,
investment.
yeah, like I don't feel that that was. I think it was maybe, and we anticipated that it might have been more of a concern, but I think like anything, we are probably slipping more into, as cliche and as overused as phrase is it is what it is, right? And the reality is if you, and now I think where it might have put some sellers on pause was going back to that question is, do I need to sell or do I want to sell? And if it, depending on where you fall in there, and even actually with the foreign buyer ban, which is still a very gray area because
I thought it exempted recreational properties.
not necessarily. I've had a couple of situations where on the phone with Americans who were looking at purchasing here.
For the
I
dollar the way it is, oh my God, it's 30% off.
referred them. I said, please speak to a lawyer first and foremost. And some of the lawyers, and they reached out to a few, wouldn't even touch it because it's still such a gray area. It's really so hopefully they just do away with that sooner than later, because waiting to 27 is just when we know that that was not even the issue driving the prices.
No,
But
it was a theatrical, like political soapbox. That's all it was. I mean, you remember
exactly.
when it halted the entire market, like screeching to a halt. And then what did it last 2, 3 months, at least in the residential market? And everyone was like, oh, okay, I guess that was nothing.
Yeah, well, we have to live, right? We have to carry on, and so with the foreign buyer ban, I mean, I hopefully that they just cease and desist with that sooner than later, because I think it's just created more confusion than solving any attempt at any problem they perceived with pricing. So, anyways, we'll see, but it is. I mean, I don't know how to advise my clients with that other than speak with a lawyer, because,
Right.
as we know,
No,
you
for
could
sure.
get in some hot water.
Oh my God, yeah. No, that would be horrible. Well, I am actually really excited to do this again with you in the fall because I really, really want to see what happens in the cottage market this summer. And for all that, I've thought about a cottage, who have been on the fence about it, I mean, I don't know. I've never been able to say anything better than when I first, I think it was I had either bought my cottage or I was just about to buy my cottage, and there was this great, back in the day when people read newspapers, okay? And there was this great, like, Q&A section in the Globe and Mail, and it was like you sent in a question to like an RBC advisor or something. I don't remember what it was exactly. And it was like, I have this extra money, and I can either take it and I can buy a cottage, or I can invest it in funds, right? And so it was a bank, like it was a financial advisor or someone who would have profited from taking the money and putting it into a fund. And he said, he was like, you will make more money by putting it into a fund. I'm not like, there is no question about it. He said, but you can't grow your memories in a fund with your children, and you can't grow memories with your family in a fund.
Yes.
And I will, like, when the kids were really small, there's nowhere to go. I mean, when we were there, there was no cell service. You guys have cell service. We don't have cell service still. I've got Starlink, and like, I would say the times that we just sat on the dock and you had conversations about nothing with your kids and you sit around a table. How many people have dinner together anymore as a
Yeah.
family?
So
I mean, it
true.
just goes, I just love that idea about cottages and that family, um, structure to it. It really just goes to the root of everything that is, just great core values.
Yep. Absolutely.
And it's a shame that everyone can't enjoy it. Truly, I think if everyone had that ability. But if anyone's looking at Muskoka, Kim's info will always be in the show notes. And I thank you for making the time as always. It's great to see you.
Thank
And
you,
I'm
Rachel.
jealous of your tan. We were talking. He was in Costa Rica. I was there the week before it rained the entire time. I had to go down to Florida to get more of a tan a month later. But thank you. Stay warm.
Thank
Hopefully,
you.
you guys have a great winter, and I'm sure we'll talk.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Rachel.